You may think that you know these characters, but I can assure you, you do not. I have found myself lately going down the cereal mascot, food mascot rabbit hole, and when I tell you it's a scary place to be, I mean it. The lore that I have found about some of these characters that are 50, 60, 70 years old is insane. Today I'm going to take you through 3 of the most wild ones I've found so far, and then most likely I'll do more about this in the future. The first cereal mascot that we're going to dive into is Tony the Tiger. You may be thinking to yourself, Emily, how much lore can a tiger have? My friends, let me just explain this to you real quick. Way back in 1952, Frosted Flakes the cereal was invented, and General Mills came up with 4 different characters that they were going to use to potentially represent the cereal. Originally, there was Tony the Tiger, Katie the Kangaroo, Elmo the Elephant, and Newt the Gnu. My personal favorite is Newt the Gnu because that just sounds awesome, but I guess back in the 50s and 60s, they liked the tiger better. Tony the Tiger and Katie the Kangaroo made it into commercials, whereas they scrapped Elmo and Newt pretty quickly. Katie got phased out because everybody loved Tony, and suddenly you had Tony the Tiger. So it's 1953, and General Mills is moving forward with Tony the Tiger as their mascot, and they decide we should probably give him a little bit more to work with here, so they gave him a son, Tony Jr. Keep in mind that it's 1953, and we are getting introduced to Tony the Tiger and his son, Tony Jr. At this moment in time, there's no mention of Tony having any other type of family. So for 15 years until the early 70s, Tony the Tiger and his son Tony Jr. are the face of Frosted Flakes cereal. I do want to point out one of the things that I paid attention to while I was researching some of these characters was whether or not it's canon that they exist in our universe and not some tangential cartoon universe. In my opinion, any of these characters that interact with real children and not cartoon children on their commercials should be canon. So in these initial commercials, Tony the Tiger and Tony Jr. were interacting with real children. So they exist in our universe, and I have even more points to support that later. Remember how I said he had no other family when Tony and Tony Jr. were introduced? Well, in the early 70s, General Mills decided they were going to reunite Tony and Tony Jr. with the rest of their family. Where have they been? And why are Tony and Tony Jr. off doing cereal commercials while they have a grandmother, a wife, and a daughter at home? Because it's in the 1970s that we are introduced to Mama Tony, Mrs. Tony, and Antoinette, his daughter. Conceptually, this opens many doors for me, but I'm also confused by the naming convention, because if his name is Tony the Tiger, I would assume first name Tony, middle name the, last name Tiger. Why is his mother called Mama Tony and his wife Mrs. Tony? Is his last name Tony? Because then wouldn't his name be Tony Tony? Where's the consistency? And then where did Antoinette come from? Oh, I guess actually that makes sense. Tony, Antoinette. Okay, all right, I'll let that one slide. But for the other questions I have, answers, please. Getting back to the time frame, it's the early 70s. We are introduced to Tony the Tiger's, I can't even say extended family. It'd be one thing if they gave him cousins and friends and stuff, but they gave him a mother, a wife, and a daughter. I just don't where they're being reunited, which means they existed previously. So where were they? And I reel it back in. By the late 70s, early 80s, the rest of this family, Mama Tony, Mrs. Tony, and Antoinette, disappear. And this is where I have questions, because where did they go? I can only assume there was some sort of government cover-up that happened at this point in which Mama Tony, Mrs. Tony, and Antoinette either went into undercover hiding or they were by the government. They played it off in marketing as the family just didn't do as well from a marketing perspective, but I feel I just feel like that's a cover-up, okay? And so if this is canon and the entire Tony the Tiger family or the Tony family, whichever one it is, exists in our universe, where's his family? Where'd they go? To further support the fact that Tony is canon and exists in our universe, I would like to present you with the Italian GQ cover featuring Tony the Tiger. Actually, never mind. I won't be presenting you with that because it doesn't exist. Apparently, that is one of the most well-documented pieces of internet lore that actually is not true. Italian GQ didn't start until 1999, and the supposed cover was from 1974. There's also mentions online of him being on a Panorama magazine cover, but I literally cannot find it anywhere. So take this part with a grain of salt because I can't actually substantiate this claim in any way, but I stand by my word. They exist in our universe. He is not existing in some serial mascot realm or a tangentially parallel universe to ours. He exists in our universe. You can't tell me his family just went back to the universe that they're from or something, because they exist here. So Mama Tony, Mrs. Tony, Antoinette, if you're out there, please speak up. I would like to hear from you. I just want to put it, I know that these are cartoon characters, okay? I'm not having an episode here. I don't want anybody to become concerned really that I'm having sort of mental break here. I understand these are characters. Okay. Anyway, that's the backstory of Tony the Tiger. I have several questions, and I'm sure I will have more questions in the future, but I'm curious if any of you feel the same way. So let me know down in the comments if you also have these questions that I have. And with that, we will move on to our second character for the day. Might I introduce you to LC Leprechaun, otherwise known as Lucky Charms Leprechaun. That's his name. He goes by LC Leprechaun, which LC stands for Lucky Charms Leprechaun. So his first name is Lucky, his middle name is Charms, and his last name is Leprechaun. So he is a leprechaun that has the last name of Leprechaun, which makes me think that potentially he is some sort of historical royalty bloodline from like the original Leprechaun, but I digress. That's actually just totally that's like my own canon that I'm coming up with. Lucky the Leprechaun has been the mascot of Lucky Charms for like 50 or 60 years at this point. There was a brief point in time. Sorry, Lizzie's coming through. There was a brief point in time where he was replaced by a character called Waldo the Wizard because the executives at General Mills thought that Lucky's inability to share his Lucky Charms was actually causing more harm to the brand than it was good. So they replaced him with Waldo the Wizard, but it was very soon after that they were like, actually, no, we're bringing Lucky back. So I can only assume that there was some sort of blackmail that went on behind the scenes that forced them to bring Lucky back. Also, we have Lizzie here now, so thank you for joining us. So for about 60 years, there was essentially no lore behind Lucky the Leprechaun. He just was a leprechaun that existed as the mascot of Lucky Charms cereal. But in 2022, the General Mills Corporation published his backstory. There was a book published called The Magic Inside, which at one point you could read for free on the General Mills website. You can if you go to like the Wayback Machine, that's how I read it. But you at one point could just go to their website and read this book back in 2022. And there are some physical copies out there today, but I'm not sure how many and where they are or how hard they are to get. Anyway, The Magic Inside takes you into Lucky the Leprechaun's backstory. You find out in this story that he not only has a leprechaun father, but he has a human mother and 2 younger siblings. So he's the oldest of 3. He lives in a land that is parallel to our universe, I would say. I think it's called Fairyland or something like that. And so he lives with his family in Fairyland. And he's having an existential crisis. He's 11 years old, by the way. He turns 12 in this book. You can safely assume that he either is aging incredibly slowly or he is just perpetually 12 years old, which is kind of weird because I personally always thought that he was like more of a grown man in these commercials, which I see now is it's probably pretty clear that he's a kid, but he's 12. Keep that in mind. He's 12. We learn in the story that Lucky actually has no magical powers, despite living in this fairyland where there are other fae that do have magical powers. And this is like a point of contention for him. He really feels like he doesn't belong. He gets picked on by other kids because he doesn't have magical powers. He can't be as much of a trickster as his siblings because he doesn't have magical powers. So on or the day before his birthday, I don't remember which one, he runs away to this magical forest to hear some fortune told by a soothsayer who's actually the teller of the book as a whole. Like the narrator of the book is the soothsayer. Anyway, Lucky runs away and he's like, what do I do with my life? Eventually we find out through this story that it is his job to bring magic to the human world, essentially. And he is supposed to do this by bringing these relics, these charms from the fairy world to the human world. And so he makes it into the human world with these literal lucky charms that are supposed to be used to bring magic from the fairy world into the human world. And that's why he is perpetually trying to stop children from getting his lucky charms, because the charms have the magic that he's supposed to be bringing, but if he loses the charms and they get stolen or like eaten, I guess, because maybe during this transition from the Fey world to the real world, the only way to transport them safely was by making them into marshmallows. I don't know. I don't know. You find out that this whole time he's really trying to just stop children from stealing these relics that carry magic from the Fey world into the human world that he is supposed to use to share magic with the humans. But that opens up a question for me, because if he's supposed to be sharing magic with the humans by using these relics, why doesn't he want to share it? Which is the whole reason he was replaced with Waldo the Wizard for a short period of time. So it just clicked. Okay. Bear with me here. I'm going to go through this, okay? He comes to the human world with these relics that he is supposed to use to bring magic to the human world. The government finds out about this, and they know now that he is here. The government partners with General Mills, who then decides to give him a cereal, basically to be like, look, he's harmless, it's okay, and like normalize the fact that there's a leprechaun existing in our world, I guess, okay? The government is aware of him, and they see that he is constantly not sharing his lucky charms, which are supposed to be used to bring magic to our world. I'm obfuscating here, but the government and General Mills partner together, and they say, look, we're taking away your cereal because because you're not sharing and it's bad for business and you're supposed to be sharing magic with us. They replace him with Waldo the Wizard, another purveyor of magic, who maybe was more willing to share. I didn't do much research on Waldo the Wizard because it was a very short period of time. They potentially at this point lock Lucky away or something. Keep in mind, 12-year-old child. They potentially lock Lucky away in some capacity as sort of a punishment for not sharing. And when they finally release him again, after they've potentially gotten him to agree to sharing more, they re-release him and he shares. And now he's sharing magic with the children in his commercials and effectively the world. I don't think that's too much of a reach, if I'm being honest with you. Anyway, you tell me, what do you think about his backstory? Feel free to go on the Wayback Machine and just look up the General Mills website from that time, and you'll be able to find his backstory and read through it. There's like a unicorn and a dragon. There's a lot more that happens. But let me know what your thoughts are on that specifically. And then let me know if you agree with my theory about why Waldo the Wizard was put in place and potentially the sharing versus not sharing of the charms that are also relics from the Feywild. The last character that we are going to talk about is not a cereal mascot, but it is a food mascot, okay? We're going to talk about the Pillsbury Doughboy. Now, the first thing I want you to know about the Pillsbury Doughboy is that he has a government name, and it's not the Pillsbury Doughboy. His government name is actually Poppin' Fresh. Like, a lot of these characters were developed like in like the 50s and the 60s. I don't remember exactly what year. I want to say it was the 60s sometime that Pillsbury developed the Doughboy or Poppin' Fresh, but it was in the 70s that they gave him a friend. At the time, Pillsbury was looking for a way to advertise their like even sweeter line of pastries that they were putting out, or pastry dough. And so they brought into the frame Poppy Fresh, who they marketed as Poppin' Fresh's friend. My initial question is, if her name is Poppy Fresh and his name is Poppin' Fresh, what's the relation? Because either everybody in Doughland, which I'm calling it Doughland, technically they're canon because they do interact with real people, but I'm kind of blurring that line just a little bit for them. So if Poppin' Fresh and Poppy Fresh are friends and they have the same last name, does that mean that everybody from Doughland has the last name of Fresh? Is it like their first name? Maybe there's a middle name that we don't know about, but they're just friends, right? At no time has Pillsbury come out and said that they are anything more than friends, which gets a little bit harder to understand when I explain to you that Poppin' Fresh has 2 kids. He has a son named Popper and a daughter, I think, named Bun Bun. So this opens up more questions for me, because if there are children, there has to be a form of reproduction. Obviously, there's some sort of like domosis, which is a play on osmosis, that comes from that. Obviously, potentially there's a way in which these dough people can reproduce without needing another person. They take some dough, and maybe it's like a sourdough situation where you have to like create a sourdough, like a starter, and then you can get children from that or something. That doesn't really make sense, because we also learn that Poppin' Fresh has a mother and a father named Grandmommer and Grandpopper, and they are like explicitly the grandparents of these children, which makes me think, okay, well, what's that then? What does that mean? If Poppin' Fresh has a mom and dad and 2 children, who's their mother? And if it's not Poppy Fresh because they're just friends, he's a single dad. So we have to assume that Poppin' Fresh is a single father, and he's raising these children on his own with the help likely of his mother and father. Aside from this, they also have a dog and a cat. The cat's name is Biscuit. The dog's name is something. I'll put it up on the screen. I can't remember it right now. I don't really know much about the cat and the dog, and I'm not too worried about them. I'm more worried about the fact that there's no mother to these children, despite the fact that there is evidence in the dough world that there are mother and father figures. And so the question I continuously come back to is, who's the mother? This is where it gets a little dark. Are Poppin' Fresh and Poppy Fresh somehow related because of the last name conjunction, and they simply don't want the world to know that it's their children because we would look at them differently? I don't know. None of this is specified. We're just supposed to accept the fact that these children effectively have no mother figure aside from Poppy Fresh, who is just their father's friend. So on top of this family drama that could effectively be a reality TV show these days, they live in a house made of dough. Might I remind you that dough people are also made out of dough. And so they effectively live in a house made of their own skin. And nobody in the dough world seems to have a problem with this. They live in a house that's made from the skin of their enemies? What? How have we just accepted the fact that they live in a house made of skin of their own people? Anyway, that's the end of my lore on the Pillsbury Doughboy and his supposed family-ish And that also brings me to the end of today's video. I could probably go on for quite some time about these characters, and I plan to do more videos like this in the future, but I wanted to share with you, nay, I wanted to share with the world the stories behind these characters because I don't think that they're well known enough. I think more people need to be asking questions about these characters. Anyway, that's my spiel for today. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you liked and subscribed. Leave a comment down below with which one of these you thought was maybe the most horrifying, and let me know if there's any characters you want me to dig into in the future. That's all I have for you today, though, so thank you so much if you stuck around through this whole video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!